Hi, this is Samantha Crain, and you're listening to Walking the Floor.
I'm walking the floor over you.
Walking the floor.
I'm walking the floor. Walking the floor over you.
Hola, senors and senoritas. Welcome to episode 203 of your favorite podcast, Walking the Floor. Thank you for joining me. I'm Chris Shiflett, as always, your host. This has been an exceptionally busy week here at home. Been jamming with my buddies, Fox, Robert, and Jeff. Getting ready to go do some warm-up gigs, or not warm-up gigs, support gigs for Social Distortion, up in Berkeley and Reno this week. And tonight, by the time I post this will have all happened. So, it'll be old news by then. But right now, I'm in the middle of it. And tonight, I have a warm-up gig over in Venice at Penmar Golf Course. And it's like the first, solo gig I've done since COVID. And I don't think I had done any time really all that close, like since summer of 2019 or something like that. So that's been fun and a little stressful, and trying to remember how to play my songs, trying to remember some lyrics, trying to learn some new cover tunes, and it feels like we have woodshedded as best as we can. Now we got to actually go out and do it in front of a room full of people and just see what happens and be a band. And hopefully it all goes well. I'll let you know in the next episode, but, fingers crossed. Should be good. All right, let's talk about my good old friends at Zounds.com. You love Zounds.com because they've got 3 warehouses strategically located all across the United States to get your gear to you faster than anybody else. And over 90% of Zounds orders arrive within 2 days or less, and you get free shipping on every order. No exceptions, no exclusions. And that's because the Zounds staff is all musicians. They're the best. And they've been around since 1996. See, I'm throwing bullet points at you. But Zounds.com, that's where you got to go on the internet to get your music gear. So get over there and get it. Okay, exciting news from my new friends over at Manscaped. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation performance package. This ultimate package includes the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the 4.0. Manscaped, the leaders in male grooming, have done it again to make your grooming game next level. So join the 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with the new Performance Package 4.0 by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the promo code WTF20. Now look, Manscaped were kind enough to send me a nice little care package, and I got the new Lawnmower 4.0, and I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't use it to trim up my nether region as it's intended, but I did use it to trim my face, just like a beard trimmer, and it's great. It works really, really well. It's got a little light on it, so you can see where you're going, and if you do use it, down there on your business end, I'm guessing that light comes in pretty handy because that's got to be tricky. So don't forget, you get 20% off plus free shipping with the code WTF20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code WTF20 at manscaped.com. Your balls have been through enough this past year. Treat them with the best tools for the job from Manscaped. All right, let's get to today's interview. All right, if you have not checked out Samantha Crain, I suggest you do. She's fantastic, has an amazingly powerful voice, and is a great songwriter, and was a good hang for this interview that we did back in April. She is no stranger to grinding it out and has definitely come up the hard way. And we talked about all kinds of stuff, car crashes, her Native American ancestry and how that's influenced her music, and why she chooses to live in Oklahoma still to this day instead of moving off to Nashville or New York or LA or wherever you're supposed to move to. And I did notice that she's put out a couple tunes since we talked, the latest of which is called Pick Apart, so make sure you go spin that thing. This is Samantha Crain on Walking the Floor. Shall we jump right in?
Sure, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this today. I noticed that you've got a couple of new songs up in the streaming services, and was curious if that was part of a whole new record that's coming, or if those are you're just putting out tracks.
It's part of an EP that's going to be out this Friday, actually. So I don't know
really?
when this is out, but April 9th is when the EP comes out. It's just 4 songs, sort of like the epilogue of the record I put out last summer, I would say. So it's just sort of like my like 4-song afterthought of that record.
Okay, interesting. So did you do that? Did you record these new songs at the same time as that, or is this something you did afterwards?
I did it after. I'm not really like an EP person. I kind of tend to think in terms of albums, but I put a record out last summer, and the pandemic sort of put a pause on any sort of touring and things like that, any real sort of working of that album. And so these 4 songs were just sort of kind of bubbling, and I got to just hop on and work on them pretty quickly because I had the extra time. And what I kind of discovered is after those 4 songs were finished, that was sort of it. It wasn't like a full album idea. It was just sort of I think the last sort of remnants of maybe where my brain and heart was already from the last record. So It was just kind of a weird moment that I just ended up capturing and making an EP out of it.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned putting out your record last year, and obviously lots and lots of artists struggled with, having to put a record out and not being able to tour. And touring for people that do what we do is like, that's the way you really market your record, especially if you're in the sort of indie space or Americana space or rock and roll space or whatever. So does it feel like that is beginning to thaw? Like you're in Oklahoma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are shows kind of starting up again? I know it's kind of different everywhere, and I'm seeing little pockets of gigs here and there, depending on where you are in the country. Does it feel like it's starting to get back to doing some gigs again?
Yeah, I'm starting to see it a little bit. I tend to be someone that's maybe more cautious than others, but to be honest, it kind of was going on the whole time here in Oklahoma. I think people are a bit cavalier out here. It's kind of the Wild West still. So there's been music going on for a while, especially at some of the like smaller local places.
Right.
But yeah, it does seem to me that, plans are starting to be made again, and not sort of in the just to save face sort of way, but actually in the, we might actually get to play these shows.
Right.
And I'm double dosed now, so I'm ready to play some shows.
Oh, nice.
if I can, but yeah, we'll see how it all irons out.
Yeah, I've said that the only upside to COVID is like that we'll never have to do selfies with people ever again. But I don't know. I guess that depends on, on where you are and what, whether you've been vaccinated or not. I got my first vaccine last week, so I'm happy about that. But I think to the point about touring and stuff, it does feel like it went from like, those projections kept getting further and further off into the future. And, I was hearing things like, well, maybe it'll be 2022 or whatever. And now all of a sudden it just feels like it's kind of ramping up again, which is a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's still like anybody's guess is as good as mine sort of thing. But as soon as I get some green lights, I'm ready.
You mentioned your last record, and there was a passage, I think it was in your bio that I read, that I thought maybe it'd be nice if you could expand upon what was going on here. It says your last LP, A Small Death, found the Oklahoma-based artist confronting decades of grief, trauma, incapacitating physical pain, which left the singer home in bed, barely able to perform or play an instrument. And I know that there were like a series of car crashes that happened. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how that must have had a massive impact not just on you as a person, but also as an artist.
Yeah, it's sort of like a twofold thing that led to my sort of time of sort of forced convalescence, I guess. What I had sort of been dealing with, apart from the car wrecks, is just like not really dealing with things as they come into your life, just years and years and years of letting things just boil under the surface. And that was a lot of family stuff, a lot of like family drama, a lot of just like personal stuff. And then on top of that, I had struggled for years with like tendonitis and carpal tunnel, and was dealing with some substance abuse as well. And so it was just sort of like layers and layers and layers of stuff that at some point finds a breaking point. What the breaking point ended up being for me, though, is there was a summer where I was in 3 car wrecks right in a row. I always like to preface that by saying I'm not an awful driver. This was just like bad luck. I wasn't even driving in 2 of the wrecks, but
I mean, when you see multiple, it's good of you to point that out, because when you see multiple car wrecks, of course, the tabloid journalist in us all goes like, "Oh, you must have been fucked up."
Yeah, no. It wasn't anything like that. It was just sort of, I mean, it could have even been some sort of like spiritual intervention or something. I'm not sure, but what it did, though, is it just took the problems that I was already having with my hands, and because of the additional skeletal and nervous system damage, it sort of just like my whole body just sort of seized up. And I think it was kind of dual-sided. It was like it was my brain just sort of shutting down and saying like, I can't do this anymore, and then also actual injuries sustained in the car wreck. So basically what that did is just like put a pause on my life for almost 2 years, because I couldn't tour, I couldn't play instruments, I couldn't really even like take care of myself. I mean, there was like a period of time where I couldn't pick up like a cup of water on my own. So basically it was just sort of like a body mind shutdown. And what that forced, I guess, is me to deal with a lot of past trauma that I had just sort of been pushing down, and then also letting my body heal, and sort of getting to know myself from scratch, really, because I had always placed so much importance on me being Samantha Crain, the musician, and not really having much worth about myself outside of that. Like, who was I outside of that? And this sort of time period in my life really forced me to, I think, accept myself and get to know myself outside of being a musician of any sort, because it just wasn't like possible for me at the time. And then on the other side of that, with various therapies and things like that, I started working through both the like cognitive mental stuff, but also the physical stuff, and sort of gaining use of my hands back and being able to play again. And then music just sort of started flowing out of me again. But this time I feel a bit better connected with it. Like I enjoy it more, just because I realize, I guess, that I'm a person outside of that as well. It's an addition to me, which feels more exciting than it just being everything, I think.
I mean, did that period of time, like, did your sort of the creative part of your brain just get put on pause, or was that still, were you still kind of like, thinking of song ideas and things, even though you couldn't necessarily play or maybe even realize them? Like, how did that work?
I don't know if it got put on pause, but honestly, I was just in such a dark place mentally that, like, I don't even think making things was at the forefront of, I didn't even have the like mental space to think about it. So there was just like a year and a half where it was hard enough for me to like get out of bed in the morning, let alone be thinking about making a song. But I tend to think of creativity sort of as like inactive and active times anyways. Like I I'm not always writing, but I still consider, like, if I go 3 months, for instance, I wrote a song last night and I hadn't written a song for about 3 months. And so I don't consider those 3 months to have been writer's block. I just consider it to be like inactive writing time where I'm sort of subconsciously taking in things around me and kind of processing things outside of the active, like sitting down and writing time. So that was just a really long, inactive writing time for me, I guess.
You filled the tank.
It was full. It was full and overflowing. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned carpal tunnel, and as a guitar player, that's like my worst nightmare. And I think every time I get a pain in my wrist or something, I'm like, oh fuck! Like, how do you deal with that moving forward to avoid that happening again?
Well, this past year was actually supposed to be sort of my test year of like, how does it feel to get back into playing shows all the time, and because I had a record come out. So in my mind, I was thinking like, well, now I get to see what it's like to play for an hour every night and see how my hands hold up with all these new like tricks and therapies and stuff that I'm doing. So that was put on hold, of course. So I'm really not sure like how it's going to translate to practical touring on a like rigorous schedule again. I'm a very like stretchy person now. Like anytime I'm standing anywhere, I'm just like moving my hands and limbs and stretching around a lot. And then I've also made like a lot of old person lifestyle choices about like what I'm putting into my body and sleeping and that sort of stuff.
Who knew you needed sleep? Right?
I mean, at this point, I think when you get to a certain age, and you're like a musician, it almost becomes like you're a professional athlete or something. Like you're really
touring is maintenance. Especially if you're the singer, touring is maintenance.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's hilarious the amount of just stuff that I do around playing a show that seems that my like 20-year-old self would have just been like, rolling eyes at and snickering at.
Totally.
But I'm like pouring neti pots through my face right before a show and stuff. So it's just, it is what it is. I think a lot of it has to do with just lifestyle maintenance and stuff like that. So I will hope in the future that I don't have as much of an issue, but it'll always be an issue for me. It's in my body now, I think.
Has it changed how you play guitar? I think in my own experience over the years, when I was younger, I was a much more sort of physical, aggressive guitar player. I hit the strings harder. I held the neck harder, and I have a much lighter touch now as I've gotten older. Have you seen your own playings sort of evolve?
Yes, totally. I've started getting into open tunings a lot more, which are like easier for my left hand to hold down. I've sort of moved away from what you're describing, the like heavy strumming, heavy gripping, sort of more powerful style of playing. And now I do have a much lighter touch, do a lot more like finger picking stuff with my right hand. And I've also learned the magic of a good guitar setup and just getting the action lowered a little bit. Right. I've worked a little bit with this guy who's helped me try out some like different neck shapes and stuff on like an acoustic guitar. We haven't like found anything perfect yet, but he has made me a couple like test things to see if like different neck shapes and sizes help with my left hand a little bit more. But yeah, mainly the open tunings, I think, was the biggest sort of eye opener for me, because I hadn't really played around with open tunings much until this stuff started happening. And I just realized it was so much easier for me to work within open tunings and not sort of tire my hand out during a song. It also changes the way I make a set list even, because if I'm going to play a song that's just all bar chords, then I'm going to play like some easier open tuning song after that, just to give my hand a break. So
that is a funny thing. Like I like with touring, especially when I go out and do my solo tours, if it's a Foo Fighter tour and I have like my tech and I don't have to deal with my own gear, but like when it's my own tour, I always plot those things out like, oh fuck, I do a baritone guitar solo on that one song, so I got to have at least 2 or 3 songs where I can do that, and to merit bringing that thing, or if it's an open tuning, I got to have at least a couple songs, so just to limit the amount of shit that you have to schlep around.
Yep. The whole awkward moment of like taking a guitar on and off, like before and after the song.
Oh yeah, dead space.
Yeah, the dead space, and being like, well, I don't have a story about this song, so I just need to be able to like go right into it.
Dead space opens up the heckling, that's when the commentary begins. Can we back up a little bit and talk about what growing up in Oklahoma was like? Are you from Norman, Oklahoma? Is that right?
I'm from Shawnee originally, but I do live in Norman now. I moved back to Oklahoma about 5 years ago now, and I settled in Norman just because it seemed like a nice place.
Well, I'm not familiar really with either Norman or Shawnee. So what was Shawnee like growing up? Is that small town?
Yeah, it's smaller. When I was growing up, it was about 15,000, but I actually grew up on the outskirts in an even smaller town of about 500 people called Dale. But Shawnee was like the town with the, drive-in burger joint and the movie theater and stuff. So I would go in to town a lot there. And it's just like a pretty run-of-the-mill, like Midwest small town. There's nothing really remarkable or special about it, I wouldn't say.
Just don't tell the people of Shawnee or Dale that.
I don't think that they would argue. I don't think they would argue with me, honestly.
Were you aware of the sort of the musical heritage of Oklahoma, like, from the Leon Russell, J.J. Cale thing to more like, even the modern stuff like Red Dirt and that scene and Conor Oberst, there seems to be like a long, rich musical history to that state.
I was not until I was older, honestly. I did not really have any sort of relationship to music at all, except through Southern Baptist Church and Choctaw powwows. Those were really like my 2 entry points into music as a kid. And so a lot of like religious music. And as I got older, really my entry point into music was more through movies, which is a weird thing, but hold one sec. I'll try to explain. We had a Blockbuster video in Shawnee, and every day after school, because I was just like a weirdo and like didn't really have many friends. That didn't have much in common with kids. Didn't really understand, like, I didn't like school, so I just sort of was like a loner. And every day after
a musician.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you didn't know it yet.
A misunderstood musician, even though I didn't know it yet. But I would just stop by the Blockbuster after school almost every day, pick out a movie, go home, watch the movie, and then I'd return it on my way to school the next day. And there was the staff at this Blockbuster, just like had great taste in movies, and they started showing me all these like weird movies that I would never have run across at all on my own. And that sort of got me talking to people like within the video store, and they started telling me about music and bands that I should listen to. And that was the prime time of LimeWire, when you could just download anything you wanted, off LimeWire or Napster illegally on the internet. And I had access to a computer because I was in a computer club at school. So I downloaded songs illegally on my school computer and like...
We won't turn you in. The authorities are not listening.
Yeah. And that's just like how I started getting into music. I started listening to everything from, Bob Dylan and Grateful Dead to stuff that was more like in the indie rock thing, like Built to Spill and Guided by Voices. And that sort of was my entrance into like music. And then I started going to like DIY shows and all ages shows in Oklahoma City. And that's where I found like the community of musicians, and saw that bands would travel around in a van and play shows to 40 people. And to me, that was just like pinnacle dream right there. Like a lot of people, I think, that get into music, they see Michael Jackson or something play an arena of people, and they're like, I want to be that person. Me, I saw like a bunch of gross dudes crawl out of a van and get up on stage and play for 40 people and get paid in a case of beer. And I thought, like, if I could only do that, I would be happy.
See, I wanted to be Motley Crue in the stadium, but I wound up in the shitty van somehow. I don't know.
Well, I feel like pretty good about it, because I've reached the 40-person playing to 40-person band status, so it's all uphill from here. Yeah.
Nice. You mentioned Choctaw powwows. Can you talk about that? Like, did you grow up with like a connection to your Native American side of your being and heritage and everything, like with a lot of other Native American people, or were you disconnected from that, or what was your relationship to that?
Yeah, I grew up like very steeped in my tribe. Like we went to all of the events, and my family's always been like pretty involved within the tribe. Our tribe, the headquarters of it are like in southeastern Oklahoma, which is where my grandparents lived, on their original allotment land from Dawes era, post Trail of Tears, sort of.
Oh, wow.
When they were allotting land to Native American families in what is now Oklahoma Indian Territory. So I grew up like really steeped in all of that, but also like very aware that I'm also white. And so it's just sort of like anybody that has some sort of like identity crisis, not feeling like Indian enough, or not feeling, white enough or whatever. I mean, I'm pretty like chill with it now, because there's so many people that I've met on this journey of being involved with a lot of other Indigenous artists that every one of them that I've met has had some sort of feeling like that. So I've felt a lot of peace in knowing that that's something that a lot of people deal with. But yeah, I was really lucky to get to, I think, be like raised knowing that I was Choctaw, and like being told to be proud of that, and being, I guess, allowed the opportunities to be around the cultural and heritage, the cultural elements and the heritage of my ancestors. And then when I got older, I started getting like a little bit more involved, like past what was just offered to me. Like I've started learning the language and writing songs in the language, and been able to sort of dig in that way.
Interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing in this time that we're living in, where the music industry, or really all industries, but the music industry is in this period of, or just our culture in general is in this period of wokeness and identity politics, and everything being kind of pushed through that filter. And where like gender and ethnicity and sexual preference and just any characteristic about people sort of winds up getting commodified. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, does it bother you to be, labeled a Native American singer-songwriter versus just a singer-songwriter? Is that not an issue? I mean, I'm sure it comes up. Like, I guess in the broader sense, like you see these sort of narratives get developed around artists as a means to market them.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your sense on that?
I mean, we live in it's not just music, like it's capitalism. So there's not really like a way out of it, unless I wanted to completely withdraw myself from any sort of society at all. There's not a lot of way around it. So I try not to let myself be too bothered by it, just understanding that trying to have like a for the greater good mentality. It's like, if I think what I'm doing or what I have to offer with my art can be of use to somebody and is of use to me, like as a tool of living, then that is the greater good by means of someone needing to find what my story is and like find an angle to tell my story to a population whose attention span is increasingly smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Right.
So like, I understand where it comes from. I try not to let myself get too like upset about it or think about it to a point of anger. I do think it's sort of like this. Identity is such a weird thing because we want to be validated that who we are is worth being represented and talked about and visible. But at the same time, if we really get down to nuts and bolts, like we are all the same. And especially in Oklahoma, I have this conversation a lot. My friend Sterling Harjo, he's a film director here, and he is he's a Muskogee Creek, so he's also American Indian. And we have this conversation a lot because we are both kind of like weirdo, open-minded, creative people, but we choose to live in Oklahoma, where that community is relatively small, and we interact with people of all types, all colors, races, creeds, political opinions. And we personally think that it makes us better artists for that reason, because it causes us to, I think, just consistently be checking in with ourselves, who we are, what we believe, what we, how we view the world, and doesn't get us so caught up in like a world of homogenous sort of thinking, I think. So I think I kind of went all over the place with that, but
no, that's great. It's great.
I personally, like, a lot of people are confused why I still live in Oklahoma. Like, why wouldn't I choose to be in Nashville or New York or LA with what I do? But honestly, I feel like it keeps me on my toes as a person and as an artist. I feel like I keep growing for that reason, because I'm consistently sort of put in front of and around people that are not like me at all. And I think that that's a positive thing, honestly.
Well, when did you know that that music was your path? When did you figure that out?
Well, I think that it was really just like I was sold from right at the moment that I realized that you could like write a song about something that you were going through and record it. That was just like, my naive brain was like, I'm going to do that. I had gone to an all ages show when I was like 16 in Oklahoma City. There was this venue there called the Conservatory. It's something else now, but it was just this weird small venue in the middle of nowhere with a dusty parking lot. And right next door, there was a little record store called Size Records. And I'd always get there early because I was just like a dweeb kid that was like ready to see the show. So I would have, some time to dig through the record store before the show. And I would buy CDs a lot based on like just the cover. I don't know if that was like a phase you ever went through, just like seeing.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's what nobody understands that now because of streaming, but that was like it was a real commitment.
Yeah,
I bought a lot of goofy bootlegs that were like terrible, and it was always just based on an album cover.
Yeah, I did that all the time. Found some of my favorite records of all time that way, and also just found some that never got played again. But I picked up this record that I just like the cover of. It was by a group called Songs Ohio, which I came to know later on. The main songwriter of that project is a guy named Jason Molina, who had a band called Magnolia Electric Company. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them at all, but um, I listened to that record on the way home in my car, and just it's a pretty like simple record. It's called The Lioness. The production of it's pretty simple. It's just like guitar and his voice and like a cool like DIY sounding reverb and a weird, bad Korg drum machine every once in a while. But I wasn't like paying attention to that as much as just feeling like, oh, this is just like a guy who has thoughts and like minimal equipment, and he made a record, and I bought that record just based on like seeing it on a shelf. And I think that was sort of a moment of, maybe this is like the thing I've been looking for, and this is like where I belong. So I went home and grabbed one of the guitars that was already at my house, because my dad played guitar and stuff. And so the guitar that I decided to learn on was a 12-string Martin Dreadnought, which for tiny, tiny hands was a chore.
Well, there's your carpal tunnel right there.
That's my problem right there, honestly. I've joked with my dad about that quite a bit, actually.
That was irresponsible of him to leave that around.
Yeah. He should have just shoved a kiddie guitar in my hands instead.
When did you when did you start performing out and playing and making records, and like how have you built your fan base over the years? You have a lot of records out.
Well, that was the golden years of MySpace, where you could literally just look up. There was also all these websites called like midwestvenues.com or like indieonthemove.com. And you could basically just like look up what city you wanted to go to. And there was like these directories of lists of venues. Because there was a lot more like independent, small venues, coffee shops, things like that in the early 2000s and late 90s. Like, they were just sort of everywhere, and they weren't all owned by Live Nation. So you would actually just emailing either like a 14-year-old kid that was putting shows on like in a garage on the weekend, or you were talking to like a 65-year-old dude who had been putting on shows at like a weird record store in Hoboken, New Jersey for the past like 40 years. And that's honestly like how I started. I had like probably 6 or 7 months where I would go to open mic nights in Oklahoma City, just to feel what it was like to sing behind a microphone and like kind of get some ideas on what songs worked live and what songs didn't. But and why. But I almost immediately just started like messaging venues on MySpace and coffee shops, record stores, like anything, anywhere I could play, and just driving. I mean, gas was $1 a gallon back then, so it wasn't like too much of a big deal if I could drive to St. Louis and then play and get 20 or 30 bucks in tips. Then like that was kind of cover my gas. So and I would just like stay on people's floors that I met at shows, and I learned like by doing it. That's always been kind of like how I am. I mentioned earlier, I'm like not good with school or like traditional education. Like I'm way more of an autodidact. Like if I get a little bit of an idea of how to do something, I'm just like, oh, I kind of get it. I'll figure it out. So, I've had a lot of hard lessons in that sense, but it really just came from like playing anywhere and everywhere that I could for years. And then eventually, I think I probably after two years of doing that, I got together like a professional recording of like an EP and started doing the thing that they tell you not to do, which is like cold send them to record labels and management companies and stuff like that. And it got picked up by a record label out of North Carolina called Ramser Records, whose big artist at the time was the Avett Brothers. They were working the Avett Brothers, and so that was sort of the beginning of my getting like shoved into the music industry, I guess, with a little more of like a team behind me. And I have not had any sort of like astronomical rise. It's all been a very like slow grassroots sort of system that we run, but I've been able to survive an entire year of a pandemic just purely based on fans who buy my records and posters and t-shirts out of my house. And that's like literally the best thing in the world that I could possibly think of. So
as your fan base has evolved and grown, do you encounter people that were at those, coffee house, MySpace booked shows when there was 10 people watching you or whatever? Have those people come back over the years?
Yes. One of my favorite things, and it's embarrassing too, is seeing people that have on like old merch t-shirts, like at your shows, because the designs were like so bad, they're just like your like little brother's best friend who like just learned how to use a computer program, designed a t-shirt for you back in 2006. And you show up at a gig in Des Moines, Iowa in 2020, and someone's wearing that shirt and you're just like, oh, those were so ugly.
Oh, that is so fun. I was just having a conversation about that the other day when I was in a band called No Use for a Name before Foo Fighters. Like in those days, I didn't know the concept of a sample print. You get a sample print to see if the thing looks good. So like the idea in your mind where you're like, put that on a yellow shirt with like metallic silver ink. Like I remember that specifically, like having a friend of ours draw a thing and getting like boxes of thousands of them that were the most just horrendous thing you've ever seen. But then, that was the first day of tour. You had to stick that in the van and sell them. We had boxes of those things for years. That's a real sign of maturity when you understand, sample print.
Yeah. Or short run, just in case.
Right. Yeah. What's the minimum order on that, please?
Just in case nobody likes it.
One thing I wanted to get into was the actual sort of nuts and bolts of your songwriting. Can you talk a little bit about it? Because it's different for everybody. And I've found over the years doing the show that nobody has a concise answer because, none of us actually know how we write songs exactly. But what is your, to use an overused word, what is your process? My process.
Well, I talked a little bit about it, like in a very vague way when I was talking about sort of like active and inactive writing times. But I tend to be somebody who like writes in like a bulk. Like I can feel some sort of thing coming on where it's like, I know I'm about to write like 5 or 6 songs after not having written for a few months or something. And I think that's because I tend to process information like in a really solitary, introspective sort of way. Like different people handle stress or emotional things in their life in different ways. Like my best friend, when she's going through something, she talks about it constantly, trying to work out in her brain what it is that she thinks about it, trying to get advice from other people, that sort of thing. And so by the time that she's worked it out, like she's over it because she's worked it out as it's happened. Me, I'm somebody that just like completely internalizes things. I go sit in a chair in the corner of my house and just brood for months, and try to like think about it in my own head before I let anybody else know what's going on. And I don't know why I'm like that. It's just the way I am. And it has what it's done is it's like shown itself in my songwriting in that way, which is that I have these intense moments of, months of just like turning things over in my head, thinking about specific lines that I've had, written down for months. Like, what does that mean? What am I talking about? What am I thinking? Where did that come from? And then one day I'll just be like, on a walk with my dog and something will click and I'll just go home and it'll all just kind of like spill out. But I think my process is that like I'm like I just collect things all the time. If I hear someone say a phrase that is weird or cool or catches my ear, I write it down. If I see a newspaper title or read a line in a book that I think is interesting, I'll write it down. If I think of a little melody idea, like anything that enters my brain, it gets recorded in some way, either on a voice recording or in a notebook or just something. I'm kind of a magpie in that sense. I'm just constantly like collecting stuff. And it doesn't mean that I immediately go and figure out how it works into a song or something. It just, I end up with these piles and piles and files and files of stuff. And then whenever I just get this, like, I don't know how to explain it, but you just sort of get this feeling of like, I'm ready to make something. Like I'm ready to like,
it just bubbles up.
It just bubbles up. Yeah. And then I've just got piles of stuff to dig through. And I just, if something catches my eye, I just go with it. And I try to like follow that through. And I try not to judge myself for like the things that I collect either, because what seems like a really stupid idea at the time, 5 months from then might be something that turns into like a cool song idea.
And vice versa. I feel like when I'm going through those voice memos, I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? It's just an A chord for 5 minutes. I don't know. What was the idea there?
Oh yeah. There's plenty of that stuff too. Or like the recordings where you've rolled over in the middle of the night thinking that you just had the best melody idea in the world. And so you've like hummed it into your phone. And then 4 months later you listen to it and it's unintelligible. You cannot understand it at all.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's sort of like how I work. I think as far as starting a song, like a lot of people, only start with lyrics or only start with music or only start with a song title. I don't really have like a rhyme or reason. I think I'm more just like whatever catches my eye in those like times of kind of creative pulses that I experience. If something catches my eye, then I just try to kind of unpack whatever it is that is inspiring me about that. Sometimes that means that it's music first. Sometimes it means that it's lyrics first. But I just I've honestly kind of moved all over the place in how I've written songs. And I think anybody that's been doing it for a certain amount of time probably has done that, because you just get bored. You got to try different things at a certain point, I think.
Sure.
So
Absolutely. It's all trial and error, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me today. It was a real pleasure. And, good luck with the EP and as shows start coming back, I'll catch you live sooner than later.
Yeah, me too. Okay, awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, that was Samantha Crain on this week's Walking the Floor. She was fantastic. Make sure you go listen to her music and buy her t-shirts. And I'll be back in a couple weeks, hopefully with some fun stories from the road, and that will all have gone well. But of course it will. It's going to be great. What could go wrong? Bunch of sweaty dudes in a van, barreling down the highway. And I don't know who I'm going to be back with in a couple weeks, interview-wise, but still got a couple in the can, so it'll be good. Don't you worry. All right, that's it. Adios, amigos.